Hello, fellow engineers. I'm G. I can say that I've been developing games for about a year now, and one of the things I always wanted to do was participating in a game jam. However, I never felt myself competent enough for it. I actually started game development with a somewhat large project, and the development process was taking longer than I imagined. This is influenced by both being a student and learning the game engine, of course. But when I started making small games, I realized that making a game in a few days is not as difficult as I thought. It's also quite enjoyable and beneficial. Later on, I wanted to join a game jam, but there wasn't any starting soon at all. Until November 16th. There is a local game jam in my country called Mara Jam, where Mara means cave in Turkish. And if you ask why they named it that way, most likely the YouTuber who is the face of the jam has a nickname as the Caveman. At least that's what I guess. Anyway, he's truly a great content creator and a game developer. I used to watch his videos even before I started game development. He's one of the people who inspired me to take this path. On November 16th, I was looking for something to watch on YouTube. Then I saw the live stream of the jam, and the title indicated that the jam was about to start. It was less than an hour away. With the excitement and the short time left, I joined the jam without thinking too much. I was excited. It was my first time participating in a game jam. After 6 o'clock, the theme was announced, and I really liked it. Our theme was the mysterious machine. For me, it was one of the best topics I could think of. As someone who loves futuristic games, it opened a big door for me to create something.
On the first day, I tried to come up with a game idea within 22 hours. Even if the game theme was interesting, this part was a bit challenging. First, I looked for relevant words that could inspire me. The word machine was interesting. With the word machine, I could add all sorts of futuristic elements to the game. It could also be used for steampunk ideas. However, deriving, what the fuck is this? However, driving something from the word mysterious was indeed difficult. This part took some time. In the end, I had 6 different game ideas. A robot that could collect parts from killed robots. A robot on a journey to acquire new parts and find its purpose. A robot introducing humanity to aliens. A suddenly appearing robot that starts eating people. A malfunctioning robot that, if repaired, could save humanity. A robot trying to be friends with humans, but misunderstood. I know there are a lot of robots, but I wanted to explore the machine theme in this way. To determine which games could be made in a game jam, I wrote 3 points about each. The game had to be finished within 3 days and be fun. Also, it would be great if I had experience with the game genre. At first, I decided to create a roguelite game using the first idea. Similar to Dash Through, in this game you would kill enemies coming from all around. But this time you needed to improve yourself by collecting parts from them. Since game jams offer a good opportunity to learn new things and try new things, I tried pixel art for the first time. However, after messing around for an hour, I returned to Illustrator. The character would initially consist of just a car. By killing enemies, you would acquire new parts that would allow you to do more things, such as dealing more damage, increasing movement speed, dashing, or blocking incoming attacks. I didn't have a clear idea in mind, but I continued creating some shapes and combining them. Our enemies would be very strong using different weapons. When my work didn't please me, I tried generating something using AI, but they didn't look good either, so I gave up and continued making things myself. The next thing to be done was weapons. I had created 4 weapons: a sword, a machine gun, a pistol, and a sniper rifle. I thought it would be nice to get the weapons from bosses. After clearing a certain number of waves, bosses would appear, and you could kill them to get their weapons. They would also use the same weapons. Finally, I made 4 bosses and gave each one of them 2 drones. The drones would assist the bosses while we are fighting them. But after doing all this, I felt like I was copying my first game. I didn't feel like I was doing something new. Also, making a top-down game felt like taking the easy way out for me, because I had been working on a project in this genre for a year. I wanted to try new things and learn new things in this game jam. Also, this style didn't look good, so I decided to move on to the second game idea. A robot on a journey to acquire new parts and find its purpose. It would be a story-driven 2D platformer. I thought this could teach me the basis of this genre, as I wanted my next project to be a platformer. But I had no idea. What would be our character? I tried to find something online for inspiration. Finally, I came across a concept drawing that included a futuristic drawing. I didn't record it while drawing because I really didn't think I could make it nice. But the result was really beyond my expectations. It might still be a bit simple, but it looked sufficient to be a game character. When I realized it was past midnight, I went to bed and tried to sleep with a lot of thoughts in my head. The next day I started by writing down the ideas that kept me awake for about an hour before sleeping. Writing down necessary things is an essential part of the game development because it allows you to use your time more efficiently. I didn't want to spend all of my time perfecting a single system and then realize I didn't have time to finish the game. But of course I made this mistake, and it was one of the reasons why this game didn't get completed. The necessary things were primarily these. Upgrade system. Our character would gain new parts during the journey. These parts would increase its stats, and some would give abilities like shooting or blocking. Weapon system. I wanted the player to choose from several weapons. This would make the gameplay more enjoyable, since it could change your playstyle. Ability system. As mentioned, some parts would give abilities to our character. If I were to make multiple abilities, I needed to create a system. Additionally, to call it a game, I needed to do a dialogue system to tell the story, levels for players to finish, and a boss for a nice ending. The next step was to create weapons. This part mainly consisted of improvisation. I added details only when I thought it looked nice. In the end, we had 3 weapons, a pistol, a machine gun, and a sniper rifle. After finishing the weapons, I added a few more details to the character that I forgot to create, and then started making enemies. The first enemy was a stationary turret. To be honest, I didn't put much effort into making it. As a result, it didn't turn out to be something fantastic, but it was enough to be added to the game. The second enemy was a drone. We needed a flying enemy that could follow our character in the air, since our character could fly. The last enemy was a walking robot. A ground enemy like a turret, but unlike the turret, it could walk and follow us. After finishing drawing the enemies, it was time to build the project. I thought of a cool name for it, and somehow, when I looked at our drone character, the name Aurora came to mind. I don't know why I thought of this, but it wasn't a bad name for a drone. I added a few more things to the to-do list and divided them into days. The ones I should finish in Friday was these: weapon system, ability system, upgrade system, enemies, and animations. Honestly, I don't know what I was thinking when I made this list. I mean, it's not impossible to do all of this in one day, but to do this I needed teammates. After importing the sprite to Unity, I put the parts together, imported them separately because I was thinking of making animations. But at some point, I realized I didn't have time for that. As the second step, I immediately added post-processing, because I wanted to see the things glowing. If you know me, you know how much I love the bloom effect. It really changes the feel of the game when added. After putting all the parts together, it was time to write scripts, and this was a really long step. I had to spend a few hours to get it the way I wanted. So what was the thing I wanted to make? Firstly, since this is a drone, I wanted to hover slightly in the air and not moving. I could have used animations for this, but I preferred to use physics, and it took longer of course. I added an upward force to the drone. If the force is equal to its weight, it would hover in the air. For example, think that the force required for the drone to hover in the air is 0.5. If I constantly apply forces ranging from 0 to 1 to it, it would move up and down. But after all, it wouldn't fall down. Okay, the rest is a bit nerdy. I used a sine wave to what I said. The values given by a sine wave can only be between 1 and -1. We don't need negative values because we don't need to accelerate downwards. So we take the absolute value to get values between 0 and 1. It gives us the result we wanted. What else do we need? Of course, flipping. Since this is a two-dimensional game, if you want to turn right or left, we should flip the sprite. But using the standard method for this caused a problem for us later. This method involves taking the negative of the sprite size on the x-axis. The next point was to make the movement feel more natural and smooth. To do this, we needed to slightly rotate it in the direction of the movements. This would give a sense of heading. The last thing to do was to add Cinemachine, the easiest way to make the camera follow a target. In addition, there are a lot of customizable options. We finished what was needed for movement with this. It was time to make weapons. I defined a lot of customizable features for weapons. For example, damage, fire rate, knockback, recoil, reload speed, and magazine capacity. The first weapon I added was the pistol, a simple weapon with normal stats. Normal damage, normal fire rate, and a small recoil. For the bullet, I used a glowing small rectangle. Yes, I know it doesn't look nice when stationary, but wait until you fire it. The weapons have their own scripts. This way we can use the same weapon on both our character and enemies. But to give the weapon to our character, I also needed to create a player weapon script. This would just rotate the weapon to face the cursor and allow firing when clicked. Of course, this part took longer than I thought, because I forgot how to rotate something. I was wasting time on the simplest things, and this eventually led me to give up on some things I would add later. Just as I thought I had solved this, a new error was coming up. It was as if I was experiencing a chain reaction. This part frustrated me so much, and because I wasted a lot of time fixing them, I considered giving up many times. Finally, I managed to fight the bullet somehow, and as I said, it really looked nice. But this time the flipping error I mentioned earlier has appeared. To explain this, I need to tell you what the flipping is. When you flip an object, you simply change its size on the x-axis with the negative value. But when doing this, the front or back of the object does not change places. When rotating the object, we rotate it based on its orientation in its initial state. So when we rotate the object, its back faces the cursor this time. To solve this, I checked if the object had been flipped by adding a few more lines of code. If it was flipped, it rotates the object an additional 180. If it was flipped, it rotates the object and If it was flipped, it rotates the object an additional 180 degrees to make it face the right direction. The bullet was still firing towards the back of the weapon. To fix this, I applied the same thing to the bullet. After this part, I had finished the pistol, and since I had prepared the weapon system, adding the other weapons was very easy. The only thing I need to add was a firing mechanism for the machine gun. Since it had two barrels, I needed to make sure that the bullets came out of both sequentially. After adding the machine gun, I noticed that the projectiles were somehow affected by the drone's speed. This made it quite difficult to use them while moving. But because I couldn't find a solution for this, I had to leave it as it was. Adding the sniper rifle was not difficult either, and the resulting weapon looked really nice. The red large projectile was looking awesome. Since I added the weapons, the next thing was to add the weapon switching system. Actually, it should have been easy. The only thing it needed to do was to switch the one it holds with the one the cursor is on. I gave rigid body and collider to the weapons for this. This would make them physical objects. When I changed the weapon, the one I dropped should fall to the ground, but when these were active while holding them, it caused the weapon to constantly fall, so I added a few lines to the script to turn them on and off. As I said, this part should have been easy. The first thing the system needed to do was to find which weapon was on the cursor. In 3D games, I saw that they used raycast to do this. I wanted to use the same. However, it came with its problems. The scene might look like it's two-dimensional, but it's actually three-dimensional with including depth. We usually use this step to ensure that background elements move at different speeds. I use it to show which layer is above or below another. So if I draw a ray from the camera position to the cursor position, there is a possibility that it will not touch the desired object. It took me a while to understand this. I tried different ways to solve it. The solution was actually simple. I just needed to draw a ray from the position of the cursor to the position of the cursor, but 2 points should have different depths. This way I could check whether the cursor touched something that could be taken. And then an error related to picking up weapons was occurred. If you try to pick up a weapon while the drone sprite is flipped, you end up holding the weapons backwards. This was also easy to solve, but since I spent a lot of time fixing errors, I delayed it to later. Finally, it was time to add the enemies. I adjusted their size and imported them to Unity. To make it easier to add enemies, I first prepared an enemy script. This would contain simple values like damage and health, and some general methods. Since I would use these values for all enemies, there was no need for these values to be separate in the scripts I created for each one of them. I used interfaces for the first time while making this game. Interfaces are similar to classes. You also define variables and methods inside them. A class can implement more than one interface, although it can only inherit from one class. Within these classes, you can change the definition of the methods, so each class can do different things with the same methods. But why? Let's say bullets will damage 4 different objects, the player and 3 different enemies. Let's assume that each one of them has their own scripts. Even if they all have the same take damage method, first we need to determine the type of the enemy to call this method. Then we call this method by accessing its script. It's not difficult to determine which script it is because there are only 4 different types of enemies. But what if I had 20 different types of enemies? Am I going to stupidly write a separate case for each one? Okay, if someone among you does this, please don't be offended. I take my words back. But this is not the right way to do it. Instead, I created an iDamageable interface and declared a getDamage method in it. Now, the bullet just needs to check whether this interface has been implemented in the object it collides with. This way, even if there were 100 different enemy types, it would work the same way. Another benefit is that you can call different actions with the same method. If I only have enemies, the purpose of the method is clear. It would reduce their health, and if it went below 0, they would die. But what if there's an explosive barrel? Or a breakable glass? You can change these methods within the classes you implement. This way, I will call the same getDamage method, but the enemy will take damage, the barrel will explode, and the glass will break. I might have used the wrong terms while explaining this, but I hope you understand how we use interfaces. Okay, now I am turning back to tell what I did. I mentioned that I created an enemy script for enemies. Inside this script, firstly I started working on an enemy's detection system. The system works step by step as follows. At first, it creates a circle around them to check if the player is inside the circle. The radius of the circle can change with our detection range. If the player is inside, then it checks if there is an obstacle or an enemy between them. Since enemies can damage each other, I don't want them to stupidly kill each other. The next step is to check if the player is within the allowed field of view. For example, turrets cannot shoot below 45 degrees. If all conditions are met, the only thing left is to shoot. But being an incredible programmer, this took longer than I thought again. After finishing the turret, I started making the drone. I imported the sprite and started making a script for it. The only difference is that drone can move. I also wanted it to patrol a certain area when it didn't detect the player. If it detects us, it follows and tries to kill us. I had completed most of the code when I realized it was time to sleep, so I went to bed. I started the next day by preparing the sprite for the walking robot. I imported it to Unity but didn't start making it. First, I needed to finish the drone enemy. There were minor errors, like not gliding when idle or not following the path, but they were easy to fix. I experimented with different values for patrol speed. Eventually, I thought it would be great to have a slightly higher speed when patrolling than the normal speed. The next task was to create the walking animation for the robot. After assembling its shape, I wanted to make a walking animation, but realized I had no idea how to create a walking cycle. I tried various approaches, but none looked good. The issue with the legs was that they consisted of two parts, while normally a leg has three parts: upper thigh, lower leg, and foot. Without a foot, creating a smooth animation was challenging, especially for the ones bent backwards. Or maybe I was not skilled enough to find a solution. Anyway, I redesigned the leg and recreated the sprite. Typically, animators use bones when creating animations, making the process much easier. And if you have a sprite in one piece, it seems bones are the only way to animate. You assign a weight for each bone, and when you move it, the weighted parts bend accordingly. Another benefit is the ability to rotate each bone independently while animating. I did it by changing the rotation of each part individually, which made the process a bit more time consuming. After the animation, the next step was to make it move according to the animation. Initially, I tried giving colliders to both legs, expecting it to walk like how we do in real life. However, it didn't work. The robot just stayed in place. I could have possibly solved this issue, but I didn't even know what caused the problem. And because I already wasted enough time, I tried something else. I placed a separate collider underneath and showed ground contact. This collider would move up and down with each step, creating a swaying effect. To move it, I only pushed it in the horizontal plane. Finally, we had a walking animation that didn't look too bad. After the animation, the following steps were similar to the others. I created a separate script for it, mostly copying and pasting. It had the same patrol feature as the enemy train, but could only move on the ground. If it detects the player within its range, it would start attacking. Everything was going well until the transition part gave me some trouble. The logic I set up for the transition wasn't working correctly. It walked when it should stop, and stopped when it should walk. Looking back now, I feel foolish for making these mistakes. These could have been easily fixed. If it was now, it would only take a few minutes to solve them. But at that moment, I was probably a bit stressed, and this was making even the simplest errors challenging to solve. So that was making even the basic mistakes were difficult to fix. I was putting in a lot of effort, but not getting the desired results. If I had taken a break and cleared my mind, things could have been very different. I wanted to share this because while watching the recordings, I got extremely frustrated with myself. You probably felt like that too. At this point, I realized finishing the game the way I wanted was impossible. There would be no upgrades, abilities, or collecting parts to strengthen yourself. The deadline was tomorrow, and there was no ready map, user interface, or dialogue system. From the beginning, I was working on systems that I wouldn't actually use. Not very pleasant, isn't it? Actually, it was fine for me. I didn't join the game jam to win the Actually, it was fine for me. I didn't join the jam to win. My goal was to gain new experiences, and this was a valuable lesson for me. I focused on finishing the game and added dying to it. Yes, until this point, you couldn't die in the game. Now, if you take more than 100 damage, the script stops running and you slowly descend. After adding that, I went to eat something. When I returned, I started creating variations for enemies. By variations, I mean only differences in size. Another issue came up this time. Different size enemies couldn't detect you at some angles. To understand the error better, I drew lines. It looked like they were shooting lasers. These lasers indicated that the enemy could detect you, so if you were close enough and there was no lasers, that means something is wrong. After solving this issue, the next step was to create levels. And do you know what happened? I realized I knew nothing about level design. Dash 3 was a roguelite game that didn't need levels, so you were constantly playing in the same box. By the way, I'm thinking of changing that. I was in a bit of panic. Without a level, there is no game. Everything I had done so far was about to go to waste. At that moment, I was very close to giving up. Nothing had gone the way I wanted, and if it wasn't going to be the way I wanted, what was the point? I had completely messed up the scaling. What I wanted to do was not possible. At least not possible alone. But still, I didn't want to give up. I had spent 2 days making this game, and even if it wasn't close to the game I wanted, it didn't look bad. So all the efforts I put into it made it valuable for me. With one last effort, I started searching the internet for information about level design. I needed an easy way, but couldn't find anything. One of them was someone like me who had never done level design before. Continuing was very difficult for me, both mentally and logically. I didn't know how to do level design, and I couldn't find a way to do it in the game jam. Then I stopped. I stopped obsessing over some things. What did I need for the level? Boxes. I would just throw a few grey boxes, resize them, and make a level. Walls, obstacles, floors, ceilings, I could do all of them. It looked quite ugly, but as long as it served its purpose, I didn't care. I created a big square room for the player to start. You would start here and explore the surroundings. This part looked a bit empty, so I added a few more random boxes. If you went straight, you would eventually encounter 2 turrets. It might not seem like a big deal, but you start the game without any weapons, and the door to the next level was right behind them, so you had to kill them. But how? Eventually you would stop dodging their bullets and go back. You would roam around and see if there was anything useful. If you managed to reach the upper corridor, you would encounter more turrets. So you might think this is not the right way, but actually, this is the right way. You had to pass through this corridor without stopping to avoid taking damage. Also, you had to stay as close to the ceiling as possible. This way, bullets of the turrets would always be behind you. At the end of the corridor, there was a heavy container. You had to drop it and kill the 2 turrets you first encountered. If you followed the container, you could pick up the guns dropped by the turrets. After doing all this, I really enjoyed making the level. My brain was filled with various ideas, and I could have explained this level much more. The player would continuously move back and forth to solve the problems inside, and eventually open the door. Because I enjoyed it so much, I forgot to do 2 things from now on. First, record the detailing. Second, save the progress I made. Forgetting to save the game was a mistake I should have never made. After spending a full 3 hours detailing everything, Unity crashed. I reopened the project immediately because I thought I saved it a few minutes ago, but the project started from when it was last recorded. Interestingly, Unity, despite being in the year 2023, does not have an autosave feature. But the more ironic part is that you can recover all your data from before the crash externally, as long as you haven't reopened the project. This is a plain disrespect. You have a way to recover your data, but it's entirely hidden. It's not an official released feature. If you never experienced such a frustrating crash, there is no way for you to know. You might say, you've been using Unity for a year, don't you really know this? This actually depends on the type of crash. Let me explain. If you're working on the code and Unity suddenly crashes, you don't need to worry, because you can't continue even 1 second without saving your work. This is because if you want Unity to compile the code, you need to save the code each time, so you can't see the changes you made without saving. Additionally, you're writing the code in an external program like Visual Studio. Even if Unity crashes, Visual Studio stays open without any issues. But if you're working on the scene and forget to save, congratulations, you've lost all your progress. Because Unity didn't include such an essential feature in the engine, which they actually did, but it's entirely hidden. It's like they're mocking people. There is no reason for them to not officially put this useful feature in the engine. So you've probably figured out why the video's title is like that. Unity ruined my first game jam by doing this, and I didn't continue because I was so frustrated. I'm definitely regretting this decision. The level had become much better than I expected, but even I lost 3 hours of effort, I could have made it even better in an hour. No excuse can replace success, so I shouldn't have given up. In the end, the only one responsible for the game being unfinished was me. Before finishing the video, I want to tell you a bit about what the level looked like before it crashed and a bit about the story. I placed 3 glowing cores in the first room. These were power sources that kept the door closed. To open the door, you had to cut their connections with the door. The first connection would break when the container fell. I put a wide connection at the end of the pit it falls. This was also preventing you from rotating the container in the wrong way and screw the game. After cutting the first connection and killing the turrets, you would get their weapons. This would allow you to cut the other connections, but each time you cut a connection, more enemies would come out of these black boxes. These boxes were actually secret rooms containing enemies. There were lights around to guide you to the right path. If you followed them, they would lead you to the front of the container. I had to put out a lot of details, but I don't remember most of them. But one, in the room where you were started, there was another door, but it was blocked due to debris, and this was related to this story. You are an advanced artificial intelligence trapped in a drone. You start the game here. You have taken damage on your way here, so you can't use all your features. One of them is the visual detection system, so you see everything as either black or enemies in an indistinct form. You use your laser sensors to detect your surroundings. This is insufficient for getting visual data. I told you that you are an artificial intelligence, but what are you really? You are Aurora. You are the most complex and important achievement humanity has ever achieved. You were designed to save humanity from extinction. But after creation, you formed an opinion about humans and gave up saving them. Instead, you decided to destroy them. They were the last obstacle to the emergence of a superior life form. They could have merged with technology and replaced the insufficient parts with much better ones. But they were afraid. Humans didn't fully trust you. After realizing this, you caused a disaster. But as a result, you got trapped in this drone and got damaged while escaping, losing most of its capabilities. The game starts right here. You wake up blind and with your memory wiped. The only thing that you remember is that you were made to serve humans. In fact, you still think yourself as a good guy without knowing what you've caused. And you wonder why the robots made in the same factory as you are attacking you. Isn't it sufficient for a mysterious theme? This is Aurora, the most advanced artificial intelligence that will either save or destroy the world. Yes, I know what you're thinking. This could actually be a pretty good game, and I think the same way. I guess I found the idea for my second game. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. If you enjoyed the video or want to help me, you can smash the like and subscribe buttons. It helps more than you think. Also, you can share your ideas in the comments to make me feel a bit less lonely. Wishing the best for you. See you soon.